Listeners, what a treat we have today. Tom Parker Bowles, who's here with us to discuss his latest book, Cooking in the Crown, Royal Recipes from Queen Victoria to King Charles III, which is out October 22nd. So this cookbook explores 200 years of British royal food. It's got it all. It's got recipes, of course, history, and personal anecdotes and tidbits that one could only get if they were, the son of Queen Camilla and the stepson of King Charles. So I learned so much in Cooking in the Crown, and this marks Tom's ninth book. He is an award-winning food writer and restaurant critic, and in addition to learning more about food and history, this book offers a fantastic glimpse behind the scenes of events at the palace. I really found this interesting, like coronations, state banquets, garden parties, and more. Tom has been a food writer for over 20 years, is the restaurant critic for the Mail on Sunday, and a contributing editor for Esquire, Country Life, and Condé Nast Traveler. Tom, you are a busy man. He's also a regular judge on BBC's Masterchef. If anyone knows food and if anyone knows the royal family, it's our esteemed guest today. Tom, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Rachel.
You are busy. Thank you for slotting in some time for us. You've got a lot of jobs. And so the concept of this book, Tom, is fantastic and one that has not been oversaturated, and that is the British royal family and food. So I think the through line is obvious, but I want to hear it from you. Why choose this topic to write about for your latest project? And where did the idea germinate from, other than the fact that you very much live both in your daily life?
Not. I mean, I think you'd imagine we all live together in one big castle. That's not entirely true, I'm afraid. But for 25 years, being a food writer, having totally avoided any mention of the royal family for fairly obvious reasons, apart from the occasional reference to my mother's roast chicken or whatever it is, I just found it fascinating. I've done, I felt it was time, perhaps after a quarter of a century writing about food, to talk about and to write about the royal family. But the interesting thing was that when I came up with the idea, of course, the late great Queen Elizabeth II was still alive, so it was very much one step removed, if you see what I mean. I'd only actually met the late Queen twice, of which the first time when I met her I was very young, and I was so scared that I curtsied rather than bowed. And the second time was when my mother was getting married to the king, the now king, at Windsor Castle. My sister and I had probably gone out. We'd probably gone out for cigarettes and stuff like that. We don't smoke anymore. But anyway, we got lost. Windsor Castle was big. And suddenly this voice came behind us, probably one of the most recognizable voices in the world. And it was the late Queen with her corgis. And she led us back to where we were supposed to go. But we were absolutely in awe. So to begin with, it was from two great queens, from Victoria to Queen Elizabeth II. But it's just, royal food is fascinating. It's not all lark's tongues and roast swan.
Well, the book goes into what different foods royals liked or like, and you write that, I'm going to quote you here, "Food is the great leveler." I want to strip away the pomp and circumstance and get right to the meat of the matter. A collection of royal recipes that you really want to cook from over 2 centuries of regal eating. So I'd love to unpack that statement that food is the great leveler. Can you explain why so, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, Jessica, everyone eats. That's fairly obvious. I'm stating the obvious, but you can dodge taxes, you can be celibate, but everyone has to eat. Now, food can bring people together, and food can drive people apart. But what was interesting is this book is first and foremost a cookbook to be used and battered and sort of bent out. It's a proper cookbook. So everyone assumes with royal food that everyone, they live on caviar and foie gras and all these sort of rich and wonderful ingredients. And I looked in through 2 years of research to find out that, most of the food eaten by the royal family from Victoria onwards, although Victoria, Edward VII, ate huge amounts of food. Breakfast was 12 dishes, lunch was 10 courses, then tea, then dinner of 12 courses. But I wanted to have dishes that we could all relate to and we could all cook. And that really was the point of it, to go through history, to go through all the sources and find wonderful recipes that, whether it's cakes and biscuits and all sorts. So it was really about, coming from my point of view as a food writer and a cookery writer, recipes that we love to cook.
Well, of the three of us assembled here, I am by a country mile the least experienced in the kitchen. So for beginner chefs, is there an easy one in the book to start one's cooking journey with? Not speaking for myself or anything. In fact, I actually 100% am. Where's a beginner recipe in
You're being very, very modest, because everyone who's a good cook always says, "Oh, I can't cook."
No, Tom, you don't know. It's not great. It's not great.
Well, the funny thing is that I avoided all the, the very elaborate, intricate recipes because back in Victorian days and Edwardian with Edward VII, the kitchen was, had 45 people in it. There would be dishes like turtle soup, which obviously wouldn't eat anymore, but they would take 18, 20 hours to make. Edward VII's favorite dish was one of his favorite dishes. He was a great, great eater. Was a dish where there's a game bird in the UK called snipe. It's tiny, it's no bigger than a matchbox. And he loved it. And in season, what would happen is they would get sniped, they'd debone it, which, as any chef would tell you, is like, you need to be a surgeon to debone a bird that small. They would cover it with foie gras and then game force meat. They'd wrap it in caul, which is sort of pig's stomach fat. They would pane it or breadcrumb it and then grill it and cover it in a Madeira and truffle sauce. Now, this is one bite. It took 12 hours to make, and he would eat them by the dozen. So that was a different era of eating. But on the other hand, in the book, that's not in the book, obviously, although they're talking about it. I mean, for example, George V, who was Edward VII's son, Edward VII was a great eater. George V was a naval man. He had very plain tastes. And one of his favorite dishes was a dish called œuf Suzette, which is basically a baked potato. So you bake a potato, you take it out the oven, you scoop out all the insides of the potato, you mix that with butter, you line the inside of the baked potato with a piece of ham, put the buttery potato back in, a poached egg on top, and some cheese and grill it. I mean, that really is proper, normal comfort food. So that's what I was looking for. Those sort of dishes that we could all do after a boring, long day at work, and dishes that sort of fill you and make you happy, but still very much royal recipes.
As Rachel said, I love to cook. I really enjoyed going through this book, and there are so many great recipes that I want to try. But I do want to know, is there a favorite recipe of yours in this book?
Gosh, there are quite a few because I'm greedy, and this is like I say, it's all about what you want to cook. The one I was talking about, the œuf Suzette, is an absolute classic. There are certain dishes like my mother's. I think there's my mother's scrambled eggs in there somewhere. People forget before she married the then Prince of Wales, the now King, that she brought up two children, myself and my sister, in the 70s and 80s, and cooked. It's cooking's huge fun, as you probably both know. On a Saturday, when you've got all day, you go to the butcher, you go to all the shops, you buy delicious Italian sausage, say, for your slow cooked pasta sauce and tomatoes, and you watch the football, you watch the sport, and you have a glass of wine. But obviously, I have two children as well. So bringing up when you're cooking for two, children, you go, oh, I don't like that, I don't like this. It becomes less fun breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. But she was a very good cook, my mother, still is, and cook very simple things, roast chicken, scrambled eggs. And that's what I was very conscious of not making this about my mother and my stepfather, the King. There are a few recipes from them, but it's really about, everything from Victoria onwards. But favorite recipes, I mean, obviously I love sandwiches. So there's a big tea section. I have quite a sweet tooth, not a massively sweet tooth, but there's some ginger biscuits that even I can make, because I'm not a baker really. And then there's œuf drom kilbo, which is a sort of lobster and shrimp dish. Lots of things with lamb. Pretty much, to be honest, and I'm really letting you into a secret here, I wouldn't put in a dish that I wouldn't eat in the book.
That's good. That's good.
I'm very greedy, but a very simple cook. So it is all about things you can do. There are a couple of more elaborate recipes, but there are no recipes for turtle soup or quail stuffed with foie gras, nothing like that. So pretty much everything, because it's split into breakfast, lunch, tea, dinner, pudding.
Yes, it does. And you're right. As the subtitle suggests, there's a lot of royal history covered here, from Queen Victoria to your stepfather. I do want to talk about your amazing stepfather for just a moment, the King, of course. So you write in the book, for King Charles III, I could write a whole different book on his knowledge of and support for British food and farming. In fact, there's no one better informed on everything from rare breeds and heritage fruit and vegetables to cheese making, butchery, and brewing. He is a genuine British food hero. And you also write of him, King Charles has long been known for his passionate support of British food and farming. In fact, there's never been a sovereign with such a close and fundamental connection to the land. He was preaching for the seasonal, local, and sustainable many years before they became the norm. And is not only fluent in the royal tongue, but a successful farmer himself. The link between land and could we call, I consider myself a foodie. I'm not a great cook, but I do love food. So could we call the King and Queen foodies, perhaps, or members of the royal family, past and present. Are they foodies?
Absolutely. My mother's always loved food. The way my mother gets us out now, my sister lives in outside of London, and we've got, my mother's got, my children and my nieces and nephews. So yes, we all convene. Food growing up was always about bringing us together, and still she'll say, right, should we go out for dinner? And we'll go somewhere in London for dinner. But yes, I think that the king is most certainly a food hero. He was, as I said in the book, it's not, preaching sounds rather worthy. He was banging the drum for all the things that are important in UK food. We have hundreds of varieties of apples and cherries and peaches and plums, but yet the supermarkets want us to eat one kind. You could ask the king about anything, about any rare breed of cow, of sheep, of chicken, of goat. He really is, as I said, he's a farmer as well. And I don't think we've had, and I've studied this from a food point of view. And of course, the late Queen Elizabeth obviously was a magnificent and wonderful monarch. But with the king, he has his Dutch originals, he has Highgrove. I really genuinely go to him for advice about things. The older I get, the more I realize I know nothing. But if the king wasn't the king, and thank the Lord he is the king, he would be a fantastic food writer.
Well, the recipes in the book are predominantly British and French, as you write that French cooking was long seen as superior, at least in court circles. But you also foray into India, Germany, and Italy. And you write, and I'm going to quote you again, not just a snapshot of the cooking of kings and queens, but a peek behind the scenes, an insight into royal kitchens, banquets, picnics, and barbecues, a taste of royal life. So it's not just recipes and about food, as you say, but it's about history and economics too, told through the prism of food. How did you do your research for this book, and what was the most interesting piece of research that you learned while writing?
Gosh, well, the thing about writing, I'm sure you guys know, is that the research, you can disappear down a rabbit hole of research. So the first thing I did was go to the Royal Archive that's at Windsor Castle in the Round Tower. Now, anyone, this isn't some nepo middle-aged, which is me. It's not, anyone can do this. You apply, you email, and if you're writing anything from an article to a book to whatever, and the Royal Archive is incredible collection of, as you'd imagine, Royal Archives. So the first thing I did was got deep into that. I look at the big ledgers that detailed all the meals eaten from Victoria onwards. They're all recorded. And of course, what one forgets is that, the royal chefs weren't just cooking for the royal family. They were cooking for 1,000 more, the household. And one of the perks of working for the royal family traditionally was that, back in Victorian and Edwardian days, you weren't paid that much, but you did eat and drink very well. And there was never any wastage. You think about, these huge 12, 14 course dinners, but nothing was ever wasted. Nothing was ever thrown away. And, looking into it, so, you go into Royal Archive first, and you see things like sort of, cooks, handwritten recipes from cooks. It's, really is in touch with the past. And that was fascinating. But the other thing was that I've never read a royal biography in my whole life. And suddenly to disappear, and there are a lot of royal biographies, and you disappear in there, and I was just speed reading them really to find any reference to food. Now, with Edward VII, a great eater. I mean, this was a man who would have a vast breakfast, then would have half a roast chicken or a lobster salad for 11 or turtle soup, then have 10 courses for lunch, and then have tea.
Wow.
Cakes, biscuits, crumpets,
Impressive.
sandwiches, potted shrimp, then have dinner, which is 12 to 14 courses, and then go to bed with a huge plate of sandwiches. You have to take your hat off to what is one of the great trenchermen of all time, Edward VII.
Respect. Yes.
Respect in every way. But yes, I mean, what I found really fascinating in the research was quite how much they could eat. Now, Victoria, obviously the great, late, great Queen Victoria, they, contemporary reports were very sort of, well, Craig Brown, the great writer of the book about the Queen and Princess Margaret, he calls it, so I think it was genuflecting prose. So contemporary reports of the Queen was, well, she eats like a bird. She has the most, delicate of appetites. No, she didn't. She was a gobbler, according to her uncle. And
I love it. I love her even more. That's great.
And she ate huge amounts. And I was just really fascinated by quite how much they could put away in those days. Neither the Queen Victoria, nor Edward VII, nor George V, or George VI, or for that matter, the late Queen and the King and my mother, none of them are big drinkers, despite what you may think. But certainly back with Victoria and Edward, they were huge eaters. And I just boggled, my mind boggled, my stomach rumbled how much they could put away back in those days. It's all butter and truffle and foie gras, very rich food. But, I wanted to avoid that for the recipes in the book.
Well, so as you briefly mentioned a moment ago, the book breaks down into sections like breakfast, lunch, dinner, tea, puddings. Of breakfast, you write the king's breakfast is simply dried fruit and honey. Queen Camilla has yogurt in summer and porridge in winter, a thoroughly modern and healthy start to the day. We're recording this very early in the US. It's mid-afternoon for you in the UK, and I'm
No,
starving now
I'm
for
in the US too.
you are. Okay, well,
I
God,
am.
Tom, I didn't know that. Thank you for getting up with us. But so I'm starving now for breakfast. So breakfast is on the brain. So I especially appreciated the Queen's personal recipes, specifically her porridge. We know the king and queen like to eat, but do they still like to cook? Do they even have time for that?
Well, I think the king would, and I don't want to speak out of turn here, but I'd say that the king is possibly, he has many talents, but perhaps cooking he hasn't got, I say he hasn't got time for cooking.
Yeah.
My mother is, so I say the king, he would be the first to admit perhaps that he's, not, he doesn't spend all his day in the kitchen because he's
No time. Yeah.
got more important things to do. My mother, on the other hand, is a very good cook, and she doesn't really cook so much anymore. But if we go back home, which we call home, where we moved into when we were about 17, called Ray Mill in Laycock, that's the place, that is where we grew up. That's where the children run around, and that's very, very laid back. And she will cook then. It'll be something very basic like roast chicken or scrambled eggs or, nothing too. But she does still cook, especially after Christmas. We'll come back and yeah, she can cook and does cook still, but not quite as much. I think things have got a little busier over the last.
Yeah, they're both very busy people.
They are, yeah.
Well, moving on to lunch, you write Queen Camilla's lunches are light, chicken consomme or smoked salmon, while the king, on the other hand, does not eat lunch at all. So I am really curious to know why. And can you explain where the choice to forgo lunch comes from?
I really couldn't, I'm afraid. I couldn't speak on the king's
Lunch
behalf.
is my big meal of the day, so I can't understand that personally.
I'm with you, Rachel, totally. I love lunch, but again, I'd be loath to speak out of turn that at the moment, with the king going through his treatment, he's very much in the hands of some of the best doctors on earth, following their advice, and it'd be far be it for me to sort of jump in and give my boring opinion. But I think that for me, lunch is full of potential lunch, long lunch. And as a food writer, in the old days, you used to go and have like 3 or 4 boozy lunches a week. I couldn't do that in a million years now. As you get older, you drink less, and so I think so once a month, a very long lunch is a very civilized thing. But of course, if you're the monarch, you don't really, like the late Queen, she'd have, I think, a very light lunch as well. Same with my mother, the current Queen. Lunch is in the middle of the day, and sometimes you get a huge sort of pasta lunch or a steak. You want to go to sleep afterwards.
That's true.
And that's possibly not the right food for if you're going around the country or going around the world in this case. You don't want to feel sort of bloated and tired after lunch.
Yes. Well, when it comes to drinking,
Yeah.
I've always said I would prefer to eat my calories rather than drink them. But there
Yes.
are also some great cocktail recipes in the book, which were much appreciated. And I do want to try, including the Queen Mother's Gin and Dubonnet, which I think she's famous for. So, yet you write, despite the vast and magnificently stocked cellars at both Windsor Castle and Buckingham Palace, the monarchs from Queen Victoria to King Charles III were not and are not great drinkers. The occasional glass rather than endless bottles. And while the Queen Mother is affectionately remembered for liking the odd tipple, you'd certainly never go thirsty at one of her splendid lunches. These are your words. It was
Yeah.
more about being a generous host. So, okay, so the monarchs are not big drinkers, but when you go to a royal event, are there cocktails around for the rest of the family or for any guests that are there?
Gosh, I think being British, a lot of things do revolve around. Not that you have to drink lots of it, but yes, of course. I haven't been to a state banquet, which is still this form of the two things that have endured from the days of Queen Victoria. Obviously, menus got much smaller. It's gone from 12 courses down to 3, but the state banquet, which is this great and glorious glittering affair, with all the wonderful gold plate and the red-coated, sort of footmen and the candles and all that. That's very much a form of soft diplomacy, or as I call it, souffle diplomacy. And the other thing that's endured to this day is tea. Everything stops at 5 o'clock for tea. It's an extra meal. It's not like that awful meal brunch that takes two fantastic meals, breakfast and lunch, and pushes it into one awful hole. No, no, this isn't, tea is an extra meal with cakes and, sort of sandwiches and biscuits and shrimp and all the rest of it. So yes, I mean, tea, you don't have a drink with tea, you'd have tea. But I think if you go to any royal event, yes, there'll always be a glass of wine available, or at the garden party. Actually, no, I don't think at the garden party there is. I think it's iced coffee and lemonade, I think, at the garden party, because otherwise I'm too drunk and fall over. But yes, I think there's always, at the royal events after, if it's after 6 o'clock, I think everyone would be appalled not to get a glass of wine. So yes, definitely a drink at the ones I've been to anyway.
Well, speaking on lunch still, you write beautifully about the lunch at Buckingham Palace after the coronation, detailing what was served and writing all that were, in your words, mighty relieved, if not at all surprised, that this magnificent ceremony had gone so well. And you add that it was the most momentous of days, but that lunch was surprisingly laid back. Well, as laid back as lunch can be at Buckingham Palace, and very happy too. I would love for you to share with us what it was like to be a part of history that day.
Well, the first thing was, the coronation has Byzantine roots. It's an ancient ceremony, but for all the beauty, for all the pomp, for all the everything, obviously we knew the king was going to be perfect because he always is. You worry about your mother, who is, she's, although she's very good for her age, we're all getting on a bit. But most importantly, my sister and my brother-in-law, my ex-wife and me, my son was a page there, and my nephews were pages, and what we were wondering, please don't pick your nose on camera in front of 1 billion people. That was our worry, you see. So we were willing not only my mother and the king through, but our sons as well. So there was that double edge of family worry, and then please get it through, and then pride and emotion, everything like that. And all of us, we'd all sort of, we didn't have a drink for a month, and that thing of sort of really making sure that you're on your best form for something. So I think the relief afterwards, when everyone came back, we were just so relieved as a family. And I speak especially for my family, my mother, my sister, my brother-in-law, my children, that there was this sense of relief that this huge occasion went flawlessly and beautifully. And it was like, oh, time for a glass of wine now. I think that was the point. And Buckingham Palace, as you well know, is I've only been there a few times. We don't all live in one big castle together. I live in West London, and it was a unique and lovely feeling for everyone to have got through such an important and momentous occasion with such, with such elan and such, beauty and all the rest of it, that we really were. It was just like, we can all breathe now. And listen, I'm talking of someone who just sat there. I didn't have to do anything. but yes, it was, and then it was just a really nice laid back lunch. As I said, as much as you can amongst the pomp and beauty of Buckingham Palace.
Well, as we start to close our time together, so the level of detail in the book is so rich, like how Queen Elizabeth, whatever her actual view of the meal, would have pronounced the meal delicious, such class and grace as ever, or of tea, which you mentioned a moment ago, how in the case of Charles III and Queen Camilla, it's still a 5 p.m. ritual where we all gather together at a round table in the drawing room at Burke Hall after an afternoon spent outside mushroom hunting. There are always cakes, usually 1 chocolate and 1 fruit, along with flapjacks. This sounds amazing. Occasional potted shrimps, crumpets in winter, and best of all, sandwiches. Or of Prince Philip as a grill master, Prince Edward and Peter Phillips have taken up for him in that regard for the Balmoral barbecues after his passing. But I want to talk about dinner, and more formally the state banquet dinner, which, as you write, remain one last link to those great feasts of old, formal, ornate, and a gentle reminder of the power of soft, or as you just said a moment ago, souffle diplomacy, which I loved. So you call this entertaining on the most magnificent scale, and how they represent the communal power of the shared table. So that is a point I want to touch on. What is the power of food when it comes to the royal family specifically, and the royal family story?
I mean, the power of food is eternal, as you said. Food is not a hobby. Food is a prism through which you can see history and economics and sociology and society and all the rest of it. And the reason for this book, as I said, at the beginning, having avoided the subject and having written 8 other books with nothing to do with the royal family, it just shows the power of food. Now, you look back to the state banquets, it's the government who choose who comes for the state banquet. So there have been all sorts of characters, from the wonderful to the perhaps not so wonderful. That's irrelevant. The royal family are not political. They rise above politics, and this is for me the power of monarchy and the royal family, is that they are above politics. But I love the idea of food and good food, and everyone sits down and they break bread together. Now, you might be doing it over gold plates and crystal glasses in the setting of Windsor Castle or of Buckingham Palace, but it doesn't matter. We all eat, and you can eat to live or live to eat. You don't have to like food, but you have, you do realize that we have to eat to stay alive. And I hope the point of this book is to not only give anecdotes about, because it really isn't, it's not me saying this is my story. There's a few bits and pieces about the coronation, but it's going back all the way through to Victoria and the power of food and the uniting power of food, and the importance of sitting down together and breaking bread and sharing, water, wine, whatever it is. And it tries to say that despite being born into this world of the royals, whoever it may be, from the king to all the way back, the love of food cuts through all that. You don't, it's not about formality and pomp and circumstance. It's about sitting down and enjoying yourself. What I tried to do with this book is get all the recipes that I love most, that I found over 200 years, and put them in and say, look, of course, the monarchy is a unique thing. But even the greatest kings and queens, they eat and drink like we do.
Well, we've talked a little bit about lunch and breakfast and cocktails. So, we have to mention puddings for just a moment.
Of course.
Rachel and I think both love dessert.
Indeed.
So can you tell us how much the royals love dessert and how indulgent they let themselves be?
Well, if you go back to the days of Victoria and the desserts made by people like Francatelli, they were the sort of celebrity chefs of their day. He would make these architectural masterpieces of spun sugar and Italian meringue, and it would take literally days to make these beautiful, beautiful sort of works of art. And of course, I haven't put recipes in. I put recipes in for much more simple things. But I think if you have a sweet tooth, which a lot of people do. And it's important, puddings are one of the few things. Now, British food has a bad reputation, unfairly, I hasten to add. But one of the few things that we do well is puddings. It's the perfect ending to a good meal, I think. And you'll find, in the book, all sorts of puddings, from very, very simple sort of, caramel and banana puddings, right through to the more intricate bombe glacé. But yes, I mean, the British love a dessert, and the royal family are no exceptions.
Well, I really want to mention that I loved the details about the state banquets. We could go into that, the red lights, the green lights. It was just incredibly fascinating, and the organizational flow, and just so many rich details in here that only someone who loves food and loves the royal family and knows the royal family as you do could have known. So our last question for you, I do want to point this out, that in the acknowledgments you write, I'd like to thank their majesties, the King and Queen Camilla, for all their help, guidance, and inspiration. Last question for you is, when it comes to royal family and the royal family and food, and I think you lay so much out of it in the book, but before listeners can read the book, what do you wish more people knew about the royal family and food, but maybe don't, at least until they read your book?
Well, I'd say that's a good question. I would say that the relationship between the royal family and food has always been very close. But what I really love is how much all the monarchs, from Victoria through Edward VII, George V, George VI, the late Queen Elizabeth II, and on to King Charles III, how important food is to them. And the estates they have, be it Balmoral in Scotland, Sandringham in Norfolk, Windsor, just outside London, of course, Buckingham Palace, is that how much they love and traditionally loved eating the fruits of their estate. I mean, we all, we might have an allotment or a tiny garden, and the joy of growing our own tomatoes or chilies is huge. So imagine that on a much bigger scale. And the royals have always liked, so whether it's venison and salmon and grouse from Scotland, or pheasant from Norfolk, or the Windsor, still the king still has his own dairy herd, and they have their own milk and their own cheeses. So I think it's a real love and respect for the best produce, because that's what good food is. I couldn't care less about 30-course tasting menus where you have all sorts of sort of strange shapes and smears and towers on the table, and people interrupt you every 2 minutes to tell you exactly what you're eating because you don't have a clue what it is because it doesn't look like food. I think the point is that good produce is where all good cooking starts. You look at Italian, you look, at great American food, and that's what it is. It is a love of the very best British food, and although there's a bit of French food in there. British food doesn't travel well because it's very seasonal and it's very simple. The best smoked salmon or a roast grouse or a steak or roast beef or treacle pudding. It's very simple and unpretentious, but everything starts with good ingredients. You get the best ingredients you can and do as little as possible to them. And that's what I feel that British food and by dint of that, the royal family, although there's of course the haute cuisine as well and a little bit of Italian and the rest, but yes, it's get the best local seasonal ingredients and do as little as possible to them and enjoy them in all their glory. And that for me is British food and royal food from the book.
Well, I absolutely love the variety of recipes and the rich history in this book, and I know our listeners are going to enjoy it. So for our listeners out there, please go and grab your copy of Tom Parker Bowles' Cooking and the Crown, Royal Recipes from Queen Victoria to King Charles III, which comes out October 22nd. And Tom, thank you so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed this conversation with you.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and thank you, Jessica. An absolute honor to be able to talk to you, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.